While it has always been a subject of interest for certain people who dedicate their time to it, current events and news stories have once again placed the topic of UFOs, extraterrestrials, and aliens at the forefront of public consciousness. But what is the Christian understanding of this phenomenon? How are believers to understand visitors from the sky? What if I told you a 9th century Spanish-born French archbishop wrote a treatise concerning men and ships from the clouds, and their manipulation of weather with a particular interest in crops? Let's talk about Magonia. In these regions, nearly all men, noble and common, city and country dwellers, old and young, believe that hail and thunder can be produced by human will. For as soon as they hear thunder and see lightning, they say a gale has been raised. When they are asked how the gale is raised, they answer, some of them ashamedly, with their consciences biting a little, but others confidently, in a manner customary to the ignorant, that the gale has been raised by the incantations of men called storm makers, and it is called a raised gale. Thus begins Agobard, Archbishop of Lyon, in his 9th century work titled On Hail and Thunder. Agobard was born in 779 in Spain, and had come to France at 13 years of age, becoming archbishop at the age of 37. As one might have already noticed in his parentheticals, Agobard is a bit of a firebrand, and has no qualms about expressing his opinions on those who believe in the phenomenon he'll detail. Agobard continues in chapter 2, quote, "But we have seen and heard of many people overcome with so much foolishness, made crazy by so much stupidity, that they believe and say that there is a certain region, which is called Magonia, from which ships come in the clouds. In these ships, the crops that fell because of the hail and were lost in storms are carried back into that region. Evidently, these aerial sailors make a payment to the storm makers, and take the grain and other crops. Among those so blinded with profound stupidity that they believe these things could happen, we have seen many people in a kind of meeting, exhibiting 4 captives, 3 men and 1 woman, as if they had fallen from these very ships. As I have said, they exhibited these 4, who had been chained up for some days, with such a meeting finally assembling in our presence, as if these captives ought to be stoned. But when truth had prevailed, however, after much argument, the people who had exhibited these captives, in accordance with the prophecy of Jeremiah, they were confounded as a thief is confounded when he is taken." If you have ever heard mention of Magonia before, the mystical land above the clouds that men descend from, which is often mentioned in UFO and extraterrestrial literature, Agobard's hail and thunder is the primary and only source of the local belief. Therefore, any other comment on Magonia outside of Agobard's work is speculation at best, and most likely one's own beliefs tacked onto it. Agobard, as a first-hand witness, had stumbled across a scene of 3 men and 1 woman clad in chains for several days, with townsfolk assembling to decide whether or not to stone them. They believed in a land called Magonia, presumably somewhere above the clouds, where ships came from. They believed in the existence and the ability of the Tempestrati, magicians who were able to conjure storms, and thus the Magonians, having made a deal with the storm makers, would send their ships during these storms to steal the crops that were assumed to be lost during the thunder and hail, and then bringing them back on the ships to Magonia. The townsfolk believed that 4 individuals themselves were Magonians, having fallen from these ships. However, Agobard upbraided them, and eventually the captives were set free. Ironically enough, while Magonia has made its way into modern pop UFO discourse, Agobard only mentions it once, focusing the rest of his work on disproving the existence of the storm makers. Agobard mainly uses scripture as his evidence, and uses examples such as the Egyptian sorcerers who opposed Moses, being able to imitate him in many works, but failing to bring down hail themselves. Agobard goes as far as to interrogate a man who claimed knowledge of the Stormmakers, binding him with oaths and prayers, and while the man held to his claim that he spoke truly, He himself had never encountered them, only relaying a story that was passed to him, thus there being no first-hand account of the Stormmakers themselves. Agobard proposes that, in times of drought, why haven't men made deals with these Stormmakers to provide rain, if they do indeed exist? He then concludes that the power to raise storms and control the weather is a power reserved for God alone, and perhaps his saints, with wicked men being completely unable to do so. The Archbishop ends his work writing how there currently exist men who, while admitting they are unable to conjure a storm, claim they are able to prevent and counteract the abilities of the Stormmakers, and thus they receive tribute from those they claim to protect, which especially angered Agobard, as there were many who were never willing to give tithe to the church, or to provide to the needy and the orphans and the widows, but gave tribute to these conmen. Quote, "So much stupidity has already oppressed the wretched world, that Christians now believe things so absurd that no one ever before could persuade the pagans to believe them, even though these pagans were ignorant of the Creator of all things." If you would like to read the full On Hail and Thunder text, it will be linked below. And while that ends Agobard's part in this discussion, what should we take away from the UFO phenomenon as Christians?
Good evening. A flying saucer landing on the steps of Sydney Town Hall. Fact or fiction? Well, that seems as fiction from the ABC children's serial The Strangers, but there are some people who claim it's a fact that flying saucers have landed here. They point to things like the American Saturn V rocket, which, if it's launched successfully at 9 o'clock tonight, will open the way to a manned landing on the moon. And they say, why shouldn't the same thing happen in reverse from other planets?
As Father Seraphim Rose explains in Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, a Christian is to be less interested in the phenomenon itself, but rather the mindset and the mentality associated with it. As such, let's take a quick look at the culture surrounding the UFO phenomenon. While the origin of science fiction could be placed with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus, the general themes of modern science fiction seem to take root in H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, eventually finding its footing in film, resulting in the popular Star Wars and Star Treks that we know today. The spirit of science fiction could be encapsulated in a few points. Firstly, the absence of traditional religion, in which mankind has outgrown religion as it has traditionally been practiced, with perhaps keeping only superficial elements or mystical overtones in an impersonal power of the universe, such as Star Wars' Force, but not a personal god. Likewise, the center of the science fiction universe is, with the absence of God, now man, but not man as he is, but rather what he will become or evolve into. Man comes into contact with highly evolved or intelligent races from other planets or galaxies, which serve as the goal for the primitive man. Man not in the image of God, but rather in the potentiality of an advanced evolution. We even see this in fringe theories of ancient astronauts having visited men in the past, and involved in the development of our ancestors, and thus we await a second coming of sorts, to ascend man into greater heights. In addition, there is a perennial idea of philosophy in which all beliefs converge into a single truth, greater than all belief systems which exist individually. Magic and science are less differentiated, but rather the method through which a utopian vision is realized, such as the case in transhumanism and other such projects. The raw brutality of secular sciences and the mystical experimentation in the occult rather merge together into a final project of the new man. Indeed, we see this most evident in the less material nature of proposed highly evolved intelligences, not being bound by physical means, such as in transhumanist ideas of uploading one's consciousness into a computer. At its heart, it's a mystical experience cloaked in the simulation of science, which of course all harkens back to the innate religious nature and longing possessed by man, as these are all essentially religious experiences for the post-Christian man. The new eschaton belief, rather than souls in heaven, minds in a supercomputer.
This is flight number 914 from Earth to our planet. We will be taking off in 3 minutes.
Mr. Chambers, don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook.
No! 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 Ah! No!
But returning to the topic of UFOs, while the appearance of flying objects and lights in the sky has been recorded throughout all human history, the particular mass phenomenon of flying saucers or manned aircraft and the associated outer intelligences begins in the years during and following the Second World War. Ancient recordings of lights in the sky may have been interpreted as stars, omens, or signs, but today the idea of said lights having an interactable intelligence is the primary thought. Now, opposed to analyzing incidents themselves, the Orthodox Christian instead examines the effects the appearances of UFOs have on those who witness them. One thing that must be acknowledged is that, regardless of the exact event witnessed, or even the person who witnessed it, there are never fulfilling or complete understandings given. Instead, those who witness them are left perplexed or confused, perhaps wishing to explore the phenomenon deeper, but there are never any satisfactory answers given. The person is left spiritually wanting. There are typically 3 different levels of close encounters. Close encounters of the first kind are sightings of luminous objects at close range, hovering over the ground, sometimes with rapid movements upward, before disappearing, with little or no sound. Typically, these occur at night, in sparsely settled areas, with very few witnesses for each individual sighting. No pieces of the UFO are ever recovered, and there are few physical signs left, but the psychological effect left on the witnesses. The appearance is always awesome visually, and often very frightening, overwhelming those who are witness to it. Yet, because of the unbelievability of the encounter to others, witnesses may be hesitant to report it, or are disbelieved if they do. What is the result of all this? A psychological experience that is intensely real to those who experience it, yet very isolating for them, a scar which no one else can see. Close encounters of the second kind are very similar to the first, though the main difference is they leave some sort of striking physical or tangible effect of their presence. These effects include scorch marks or blighting of plants and surrounding trees, interruption and interference with electronic devices such as phones ceasing to work, radios becoming static, and even automobile engines shutting off. Discomfort or strange behavior of animals, and physically affecting humans, including temporary paralysis, numbness, nausea, or other discomfort, or the feeling of weightlessness, or even the appearance of marks on the body itself. While close encounters of the first kind leave no evidence aside from the trauma of the witnesses, the evidence of close encounters of the second kind are undeniable yet unexplainable. The evidence provides no answers, and is inconclusive and partially subjective. While no physical piece of the UFO is ever found, the markings of the ground leave indents, dehydrated or burnt plants underneath, yet even analysis of the soil is inconclusive. Like CE1, CE2 take place during the night in isolated portions of the road, often landing in front of a vehicle which is now unable to move, leaving the occupants terrified until the object leaves, and technology begins to function again. Finally, close encounters of the third kind are experiences involving other beings. While it is easy to dismiss these experiences as hallucinations or hoaxes, it's important to interpret these occurrences, especially with those who genuinely claim to have experienced them. Are these actually encounters with beings from outer space or extraterrestrials? As these accounts are varied, it would be a benefit to look at specific examples.
It's almost midnight on May 1st when a Las Vegas Metro police officer's body cam catches this, something flashing low in the sky.
911 emergency.
Minutes later,
there's like an 8-foot person beside it, and another one's inside, and it has big eyes and looking at us, and it's still there.
Someone calls 911 reporting 2 large figures in their backyard.
No, I'm so nervous right now.
The 8 News Now investigators obtaining another officer's video as he's sent to the Northwest Valley home.
One of the most famous UFO landings was at Kelly, a small town near Hopkinsville, Kentucky, which was investigated extensively by the police, Air Force, and independent researchers. In the evening and night of August 21st, 1955, 7 adults and 4 children in one farm household had a prolonged encounter with humanoids. The incident began at 7 o'clock, when the teenage son of the family saw a flying object land behind the farmhouse. No one believed him, but an hour later, a, quote, little man emitting a strange glow came walking toward the house with its hands raised. 2 of the men in the house, out of fear, shot at the creature when it was about 20 feet away. It somersaulted and disappeared in the dark. Soon, another similar creature appeared at the window, and they fired at it, and again it disappeared. Going outside, the men shot at another creature, this one with a claw-like hand which they saw on the roof. Still yet another on a tree nearby floated to the ground when it was hit. Other creatures were seen and hit, or perhaps the same creatures reappearing, but the men saw the bullets seem to ricochet off from them and have no real effect. The sound was like shooting into a bucket. After firing 4 boxes of shells with no effect, all 11 people, thoroughly terrified, drove to the Hopkinsville police station. The police arrived at the farmhouse after midnight and made a thorough search of the premises, finding a few unusual markings and seeing several strange meteors that came in the direction of the farmhouse, but discovering no creature. After the police left, however, the creatures reappeared, causing more trouble in the household. The humanoids in this case were described as being about 3 to 4 feet tall, with huge hands and eyes without pupils or eyelids, large pointed ears, and arms that hung to the ground. They seemed to have no clothing, but to be nickel-plated. They approached the house always from the darkest side, and did not approach when the outside lights were turned on. Today, the, quote, rational explanation for these strange creatures is that they were owls. Another famous case in America is that of the Flatwoods Monster. At 7:15 on September 12, 1952, in the town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, 2 brothers, Edward and Fred May, with their friend Tommy Heyer, saw a bright light streak overhead and appeared to crash in a neighbor's farm. Running home, the boys' mother, Kathleen May, along with the family dog and National Guardsman Eugene Lemon, accompanied the boys to investigate the crash site. Upon arriving, they saw a pulsing red light, and Lemon aimed his flashlight in that direction, and they witnessed what was described as a 10-foot-tall man-like figure, with a round red face surrounded by a pointed hood-like shape. May described the creature with having small, claw-like hands, and a head resembling an ace of spades. The being seemed to levitate off the ground, and when it hissed and glided towards the group, they dropped the flashlight and fled in terror. The group described the smell of a pungent mist, causing them to feel nauseous, suffering from throat irritation and vomiting lasting for days. Despite reporting the incident to the sheriff, the investigation showed nothing, though a writer of the Boston Democrat claimed to have discovered skid marks in the field and an odd gummy deposit.
Better keep out of it for a while, though. Wouldn't want them laughing at you. Look.
What's that? What was that?
I don't know.
Similar to Close Encounters of the Third Kind are the Contactee cases, in which people are abducted or converse with these strange beings. As for abduction cases, they are often so traumatizing to those who are abducted that they are unable to recall exact events and have unexplained time loss. One of the best-known abduction cases occurred at about midnight on September 19, 1961. On this night, Barney and Betty Hill were returning from a vacation trip when they saw a descending UFO land in front of their car on a side road. Some, quote, humanoids approached them, and the next thing they remembered, it was 2 hours later, and they were 35 miles further down the road. This amnesia bothered them, leading to physical and mental disorders, and they finally went to a psychiatrist. Under hypnosis, they both independently related what had happened during the missing time. Both stated that they had been taken aboard the, quote, craft by the creatures, and given physical examinations, with samples taken of fingernails and skin. They were released after being given the hypnotic suggestion that they remember nothing of the experience. Under hypnosis, they related the experience with great emotional disturbance. In a similar case, on December 3rd, 1967, at 2:30 a.m., a policeman in Ashland, Nebraska, saw an object with a row of flickering lights in the road, which took off into the air when he approached it. He reported a flying saucer to his superiors and went home with a strong headache, a buzzing noise in his ears, and a red welt below the left ear. Later, it was discovered that there had been a period of 20 minutes that night, in which he remembered nothing. Under hypnosis, he revealed that he had followed the UFO, which again landed. The occupants flashed a bright light at him, and then took him aboard their craft, where he saw control panels and computer-like machines. The aliens, wearing coveralls with a winged serpent emblem, told the policeman that they came from a nearby galaxy. They had bases in the United States, and operated their craft by, quote, reverse electromagnetism. They contact people by chance and want to puzzle people. They released the man and told him not to speak wisely about the night.
Gee whiz!
Invaders from Mars. He saw them land from outer space. He saw them capture innocent people only to destroy. Father turned against son. People changed into strange, weird animals. A general of the army becomes a saboteur.
Whether an encounter of the first, second, or third kind or a contactee case, while some may be hoaxes or hallucinations, it is impossible to dismiss every report or sighting. What was the goal of the dubbed Hopkinsville Goblins, and to what purpose did they appear? They were immune to damage, and yet caused no physical harm, only psychological terror, both from the encounter and isolating the family from the greater community, such as with the police who left after finding nothing. For those contactees who converse with these advanced beings, the general theme is some anticipated event or promise of bringing peace to the world, and yet after all these years, there has been nothing tangible in way of this peace from the stars, despite religious cults forming around UFOs. Other contactees describe the occupants of the UFOs collecting sticks or rocks, or examining human technology or repairing their own, and yet, why would a highly advanced being need to collect rocks and sticks for decades? or if we subscribe to the idea of ancient astronauts, thousands of years. Why do these advanced aircraft need to be repaired so often? Rather than things of science fiction, such as Star Wars, the psychic element of these encounters are very similar to other paranormal and occult phenomenon, with the appearance and disappearance of immaterial beings and objects, mysterious beings giving messages, and other unexplained mysterious occurrences. In 1969, a bibliography of the UFO phenomenon prepared by the Library of Congress for the United States Air Force Office for Scientific Research stated in its introduction, quote, "Many of the UFO reports now being published in the popular press recount alleged incidents that are strikingly similar to demonic possession and psychic phenomenon, which have long been known to theologians and parapsychologists." As even the Library of Congress recognizes the similarities between the modern UFO phenomenon and the demonic activity as recorded by the Church's saints, how are we to understand this? It would perhaps be best to directly compare these modern experiences with experiences of the saints and how they understood the phenomenon.
We saw this with our own eyes, an object the like of which we had never seen before. A frightening, strange shape descending from outer space with relentless purpose. Where did it come from? And what did it want of us?
Hello! It's an aircraft, all right, but like nothing I've ever seen before. Hello! What do you mean? Hello! It's like something from another planet.
Do not try to follow me. You cannot get help. Around this house, I've drawn an invisible wall through which no one may pass.
A look at the lives and experiences of those people who have been drawn into contact with UFOs reveals similar characteristics to those who have been involved with demons in the occult realm. A police officer in Southern California, for example, began to see UFOs in June of 1966. Afterwards, he saw them frequently, almost every night. After one landing, he and his wife saw distinct traces of the UFO on the ground. Quote, "During these weeks of tantalizing sightings, I became totally obsessed with UFOs, convinced that something great was about to happen. I abandoned my daily Bible reading and turned my back on God, as I began reading every UFO book I could lay my hands on. Many nights I watched in vain, trying to mentally communicate with what I then thought were extraterrestrial beings, almost praying to them to appear and to establish some sort of contact with me." End quote. Eventually, this police officer had a close encounter with a craft some 80 feet in diameter, with rotating white, red, and green lights. It sped off and left him still expecting something great to happen, but nothing ever did. The UFO ceased appearing, and in his frustration, he turned to alcohol, depression, thoughts of suicide, until he had returned back to Christ and giving him some mental peace once again. This specific encounter very closely resembles a story in the life of Venerable Nikita of the Kiev caves, an Archbishop in Novgorod, who lived during the 11th century. As a young monk, he wished to become a hermit, but was warned against it by the igumen that it was premature for the inexperienced. But Nikita trusted in his own strength and refused to listen. Isolating himself, however, in the hermitage, he fell into temptation. While singing in prayer, he heard a voice praying with him and smelled an indescribably fragrant odor. He reasoned to himself that it must have been the voice of an angel, and the odor as the presence of the Holy Spirit. Asking the voice to reveal itself, and thus a demon in the guise of an angel appeared before him. Nikita immediately fell down to pay respects to who he believed was an angel, and the demon then said to him, "Do not pray, but read your books. Through them you shall find yourself speaking with God, and you will be able to give advice to those who visit you. I shall pray to my Creator instead, for your salvation." Seduced by the spirit, Nikita abandoned prayer altogether, and devoted himself to study, rejoicing in seeing an angel continuously praying for him instead. Nikita grew in knowledge, impressing everyone who came to visit him. And while he began to surpass everyone in knowledge of the books of the Old Testament and all the books of the Jews, he began to disdain the New Testament, the Gospels, and the words of the Apostle, not wishing to speak about them or even to see or hear them, and forbade anyone from talking about them with him. At this point, it had become clear to the others he had been deceived by the enemy. The holy men of the monastery could not abide in this, and came together to pray, and expelled the demon from him. After this, Nikita repented of his pride, and devoted himself to humility and obedience at the monastery. And growing in virtue, he was eventually made Bishop of Novgorod on account of this virtue, now being accounted among the number of the saints.
Just a few questions. How many exorcisms about have you performed?
Well, there are different levels of exorcism because the church says there's 4 different types of extraordinary demonic activity. There's demonic infestation, which is the presence of evil in a location or associated with an object. There can be demonic vexation, which are physical attacks that somebody's receiving. There can be bites and bruises and marks that appear on the skin. People might even remember the incisions of letters from movies they've watched that will pop up on the skin.
You've seen that? You've seen letters just appear on someone's skin. And how do you know that somebody didn't self-mutilate or that somebody didn't do that to them? How do you know that's a spirit?
Because they appear right in front of me. So it's not like they walk in.
You're sitting in front of someone and just letters appear on their skin.
Yes.
Wow.
Similar to Saint Nikita's possession by the demon in his hermitage, people who have been contacted by UFOs have also described the beings sometimes literally possessing them and attempting to kill them when they resist. Such cases effectively remind us that, quite apart from the meaning of UFO phenomenon as a whole, each UFO close encounter seems to have the specific purpose of deceiving the individual who's contacted them and causing them harm, if not to further contacts and the spreading of the UFO message, then at least to spiritual confusion and disorientation. While the strange mixture of physical and psychic phenomenon and characteristics of these encounters may appear puzzling to researchers, this is a common affair in the spiritual books of the Orthodox, especially the Lives of the Saints. Demons possessing a physical body of sorts, yet the matter of them cannot be perceived by men unless they are spiritually aware, whether in the case of holy men in accordance to God's will, or against it, in the case of sorcerers and mediums. Orthodox literature has many examples of demonic manifestations which fit precisely the UFO pattern. Apparitions of solid beings and objects, whether demons themselves or their illusionary creations, which suddenly materialize and then dematerialize, always with the aim of awing and confusing people, and ultimately leading them to perdition. As in one of the most famous cases of Saint Anthony the Great, who was tormented by demons, even to the point of being physically beaten by these incorporeal beings. The life of Saint Martin of Tours, circa 397, by his disciple Sulpicius Severus, has an interesting example of demonic power in connection with a strange physical manifestation, which closely parallels today's UFO close encounters. A certain youth named Anatolius became a monk near St. Martin's monastery, but out of false humility, he became the victim of demonic deception. He fancied that he conversed with what he believed to be angels, and in order to persuade others of his sanctity, these angels agreed to give him a shining robe from out of the heavens, as a sign of the power of God that dwelt in the youth. One night, at about midnight, there was a tremendous thudding of dancing feet, and a murmuring, as of many voices in the hermitage, and Anatolius' cell became ablaze with light. Then came silence, and the deceived one emerged from his cell with the heavenly garment. A light was brought, and all carefully inspected the garment. It was exceedingly soft, with a surpassing luster, and of a brilliant scarlet, but it was impossible to tell the nature of the material. At the same time, under the most exact scrutiny of eyes and fingers, it seemed to be a garment and nothing else. The following morning, Anatolius' spiritual father took him by the hand in order to lead him to St. Martin, to discover whether this was actually a trick of the devil. In fear, the deceived one refused to go, and when he was being forced to go against his will, between the hands of those who were dragging him, the garment disappeared. The author of the account, who either witnessed the incident himself, or had it from eyewitnesses, concludes that the devil was unable to keep up his illusions, or to conceal its nature when they were to be submitted to Martin's eyes. It was so fully within his power to see the devil that he had recognized him under any form, whether he kept to his own character or changed himself into any of the various shapes of spiritual wickedness, including the forms of pagan gods and the appearance of Christ himself, with royal robes and a crown, and enveloped in a bright red light. It is clear that the manifestations of today's flying saucers are quite within the, quote, technology of demons. Indeed, nothing else can explain them as well. The multifarious demonic deceptions of Orthodox literature have been adapted to the mythology of outer space. The Anatolius mentioned today would be known simply as a contactee, and the purpose of the unidentified object in such accounts is clear: to awe the beholders with a sense of the mysterious, and to produce, quote, proof of higher intelligences, angels, if the victim believes in them, or space visitors for modern man, and thereby to gain trust for the message they wish to communicate. A demonic kidnapping quite close to UFO abductions is described in the life of Saint Nilus of Sora, the 5th century founder of skeet life in Russia. Sometime after the saint's death, there lived in his monastery a certain priest with his son. Once, when the boy was sent on some errand, suddenly there came to him a certain strange man, who seized him and carried him away, as if on the wind, into an impenetrable fortress, bringing him into a large room in his dwelling, and placing him in the middle of this cabin, in front of the window. When the priest and the monks prayed for St. Nilus's help in finding the lost boy, the saint came to the boy's aid and stood before the room where the boy was standing, and when he struck the window frame with his staff, the building was shaken, and all the unclean spirits fell to the earth. The saint told the demons to return the boy to the place from which they had taken him, and then became invisible. Then, after some howling among the demons, the same strange one seized the boy and brought him to the skeet like the wind, and placing him on a haystack, he became invisible. After being seen by the monks, the boy told them everything that had happened to him, what he had seen and what he had heard, and from that time this boy had become very humble, as if he had been stupefied, and the priest, out of terror, left the skeet with his son.
UFOs exist. The U.S. government found quite a number of them, and they are indeed of non-human origin. Those are the explosive allegations from a former intelligence officer tonight in a whistleblower complaint that the Inspector General is taking very seriously. 36-year-old Air Force veteran David Grush is exposing what he calls a top-secret military program that has reportedly found wreckage of fully intact UFOs. The government now calls them UAPs, or unidentified anomalous phenomena. For years, there have been whispers and rumors that the government had aircraft of non-human origin. This report is the first evidence it might be true. The Inspector General has called Grush's complaint urgent and credible. Tonight, we have a World Television exclusive interview with the whistleblower in which he claims we not only have the aircraft, but the government has been keeping much of its secret from Congress and from the public.
Now let us return once again to Agobard's flying ships and Magonia. What's interesting to note is that the ships from the clouds were very much seen as real seagoing vessels, not like modern UFO aircraft sightings. They weren't described as discs or possessing strange features, but as ships that could simply fly in the clouds. This reveals that the demons aren't imaginative when it comes to this. They must use human knowledge for their deceit. We see flying saucers because we're accustomed to aircraft, especially after the Second World War. We know of jet fighters and stealth bombers, which can be twisted into flying saucers. In the past, they only knew of boats, since only boats existed as major vessels of transport. Likewise, for the kidnapping and the life of St. Nihilus, the boy isn't taken to an operating room on an aircraft, but into a cabin. And for the beings themselves, humanoid, but twisted, recognizable, but something is off about them, that uncanny valley which is a hallmark of the appearance of demons. Is there any wonder why the supposed supernatural entity that came and appeared to Aleister Crowley resembles so closely the modern conception of the gray alien? Occultists who have had similar encounters link the beings together as well. Modern researchers catalog biblical experience under the auspices of spiritual, without differentiating between good and evil, alien or demonic. With no Christian guiding principle, the, quote, objective observer has no means of distinguishing one from the other, without the acceptance of divine revelation. While researchers today accept the modern phenomenon is the same as that which the Church faced in the past, they do not have the same tools to handle it. So, to return to the question that Christians should ask is, what then is the meaning of the UFO phenomenon in our times?
There are plenty of stories, and in very modern times, of monastics who face the demons in a very literal kind of a way. They see visions, they even get beaten up by demons. That isn't uncommon. But I think what people don't really understand is that a lot of the spiritual warfare is on the everyday things that we don't even think of as spiritual warfare. For instance, every time that I, take the second chocolate chip cookie, every time I think, wow, I'm really getting good at this, look at me, that is spiritual warfare. And it's a much more subtle kind, and it's a kind that therefore we're a lot less serious about.
The parallels of the past and today are fascinating to look at. The superstitions of the past of men making deals with weather makers with magic is not dissimilar to the idea of conspiracies of aliens and their advanced technology. Both emphasize that man is helpless in comparison. And of course, this removes the specialness of man himself and distracts from God, with the implications of greater or other beings encouraging the focus on magic or technology of the other, rather than on the providence of God or the personal growth of the human self. No longer is the occult confined to dark seance rooms, but from the sky, with the UFO serving as the medium. But should this be a surprise? For even Scripture calls Satan the prince of the powers of the air. And even in John the Theologian's Apocalypse, he describes the Antichrist as performing great wonders, even fire from heaven, a splendid and terrible spectacle. Saint Simeon, the New Theologian, for this reason, remarks that, quote, "The struggler of prayer should quite rarely look into the sky out of fear of the evil spirits in the air, who cause many and various deceptions in the air. Men will not understand the miracles of Antichrist have no good, rational purpose, no definite meaning, that they are foreign to truth, filled with lies, that they are a monstrous, malicious, meaningless play-acting, which increases in order to astonish, to reduce to perplexity and oblivion, to deceive, to seduce, to attract by the fascination of a pompous, empty, stupid effect. All demonic manifestations have the characteristic that even the slightest heed paid to them is dangerous. For such heedfulness alone, allowed without any sympathy for the manifestation, one may be sealed with the most harmful impression and subjected to serious temptation." Thousands of UFO contactees, and even simple witnesses, have experienced the dreadful truth of these words, and few have escaped once they become deeply involved. Even the secular investigators of UFO phenomenon have seen fit to warn people against their dangers. John Keel, who was an American journalist, influential UFOologist, and the U.S. Army soldier trained in psychological warfare, wrote, "Dabbling with UFOs can be as dangerous as dabbling with black magic. The phenomenon preys upon the neurotic, the gullible, and the immature. Paranoid, schizophrenia, demonomania, and even suicide can result, and has resulted in a number of cases. A mild curiosity about UFOs can turn into a destructive obsession. For this reason, I strongly recommend that parents forbid their children from becoming involved. School teachers and other adults should not encourage teenagers to take an interest in the subject." The UFO phenomenon is a sign to Orthodox Christians to walk all the more cautiously and soberly on the path to salvation, knowing that we can be tempted and seduced not merely by false religions, but even by seemingly physical objects which catch the eye. In earlier centuries, Christians were very cautious about strange and new phenomenon, knowing of the devil's wiles, but after the modern age of enlightenment, most people have become merely curious about such things and even pursue them, relegating the devil to a half-imaginary realm. Awareness of the nature of UFOs, then, can be a help in awakening Orthodox Christians to a conscious spiritual life and a conscious Orthodox worldview that does not easily follow after the fashionable ideas of the time. What the Christian is to take away from this phenomenon is the need for sobriety, to not get caught up in the latest sensation of the age. He knows that man is not to evolve into something higher, nor has he any reason to believe that there are highly evolved beings on other planets. But he knows well that there are indeed advanced intelligences in the universe besides himself. These are of two kinds, and he strives to live as so to dwell with those who serve God, the angels, and to avoid contact with those who have rejected God, and strive in their envy and malice to draw men into their misfortune, the demons. He knows that man, out of self-love and weakness, is easily inclined to follow error, and to believe in fairy tales, that promised contact with a higher state or higher beings, without the struggle of a Christian life. In fact, precisely as an escape from the struggles of a genuine Christian life. A Christian is to ultimately distrust in his own ability to see through the deceptions of the demons, and therefore cling all the more fervently to Scripture and the patristic guidelines within the Church. Such a one has the possibility to resist the new religion of the future, the religion of Antichrist, in whatever form it may present itself. As Father Seraphim Rose says, "The rest of mankind, save by a miracle of God, is lost."